To talk about the future learning experience, we have a very special keynote here today, Dr. Barbara Kurshan. She's an amazing education innovator with 40+ years of experience in the field. She's also the author of several books, including her new book called Innovate Hers, which you can actually get from Edtech Estonia if you order it online. And she also writes articles and thought pieces for Forbes. Afterwards, she will be joined on the stage by a fellow education innovator, Maria Rahamägi. But now, please, let's give a big applause for Barbara.
Welcome.
Well, I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. And Tallinn is a beautiful city, and I've enjoyed myself so much. So I want to talk today about transforming education through innovation, unleashing the power of EdTech for the future. All of you in this audience today have had experience in education. We all went to school. I do remember building one of the very first EdTech products for Microsoft called Creative Writer and Fine Artist. And I looked around the room, and I thought I was old at the time, but everybody in that room was about 20 years old because they were these great, bright geniuses, but none of them had been in a classroom except as a student. So it was very interesting for them to be designing an educational product with very little understanding of the pedagogy. So I think one of the things I want to talk to you about is what is EdTech, what is innovation, and how do we have impact? So this is a quote that I love. 1 billion learners at 3 million schools, colleges, and universities around the world are depending on innovation to prepare them for the jobs of the future. However, the overwhelming majority of institutions are unable to innovate fast enough to deliver on this mission, or they're unable to innovate because they don't know how. And numbers, of which I can give you pages of, only tell part of the story. So I'm not going to really read each of these numbers out. I'll leave them up for a second for you to look at. But one of the numbers that I really think that is the growth rate that's going to happen in this field, and every entrepreneur that I've met with here tells me the same numbers. However, it's a lot more intuitive and a lot more deep understanding of the numbers in the education market, because it's not a free and open market. Education is controlled by the governments in which it's delivered. So when we say there's a big market, the market is not as big as it appears. Some more numbers. 4% of Fortune 500 companies that use online learning regularly and extensive to train their staff. 40%. That's not a very high number when you think about the fact that we just went through COVID. And by the way, these numbers are pretty current. In Africa has a population of 226 million people under the age of 24, making up 20% of the population of Africa. Education is the main focus. And when I talk to investors, it's very hard for them to invest in Africa. Why not? Because they're afraid that the innovation there doesn't fit the innovation the way they think of innovation. But the most scary numbers are that global education and training expenditure is set to reach at least 10 trillion by 2030. That's a lot of money. Right now we're arguing in the United States over our debt limit, which is probably about that amount. So 87 billion of the global EdTech funding predicted through 2030, there'll be 32 billion have been spent in the last decade. Where's that going, and to whom is that going? Obviously, we have a whole set of unicorns in education, along with the whole tech industry. But how do we protect the future of EdTech and get our fair share of that money and use it effectively? Well, I call it the cult of innovation. We're part of a cult, and we get to innovate. And I would like to think that schools and corporate learning and adult learning and gaming is the place where innovation occurs. The truth of the matter is, when I go to a faculty meeting at the University of Pennsylvania, I sit with my colleagues, and they are the least innovative people I know. They argue over whether their offices should be 5 feet by 10 feet. I mean, it seems to me they shouldn't be thinking about offices. We just spent $40 million to build a new Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. And what does it look like? Exactly the one we built 30 years ago. Little boxes for faculty to have offices in, no place for them to innovate together, no laboratories, and the faculty insisted on having those offices. You go to the most innovative tech companies in the world today, and what do their offices look like? Open spaces, shared offices. My son was one of the early founders, early employees at Yelp, big company in the United States, went to visit him, and he was the had a job in the C-suite. He graduated from London School of Economics. He'd been working in the tech industry. He had this wonderful seat, and he was sitting in this space with these carols, and I looked at him, I said, well, doesn't this bother anybody when the CEO of the company has to, have a conversation? He says, you see all those phone booths around there, Mom? That's their offices. So I think education is the last Sebastian of innovation. But let's talk about it. Does innovation happen in those kind of spaces? Clearly it does, but it doesn't also. What about companies like Apple? We consider Apple to be one of the most innovative companies. We think of Steve Jobs as an innovator. The truth of the matter, Steve Jobs wasn't an innovator. He was a replicator of innovation. He made it happen, and he refined it. And Apple then took the lead. But the iPod wasn't the first MP3 player. Remember that. He just made it better. The phone wasn't the first touch screen. And Dyson didn't create the first bagless vacuum cleaner. And Windows wasn't the first GUI. Successful products are rarely the success of innovation. And that's a very important statement as we think about what's driving EdTech. We realize that we're in a box. How do we innovate in those boxes? And what things are good about education, and what parts of it do we need to change with the EdTech products we're developing? So innovation and technology will drive the future of learning. One of my favorite resources, and I've asked several of you over the last 3 days, if any of you use Holon IQ resources. Anybody in this room use it? Well, if you don't, it's a resource that you should absolutely look at. And they put out regular reports on the future of EdTech and the learning landscape. And they have put out recently on the future of learning 25 scenarios for 2030. The first is clearly education as usual. But that's something that we need to figure out. How are we going to use new platforms? How are we going to continue education as usual? Because the truth of the matter is making education change is not something that we can do. All of us remember, as parents now, what kind of school do we think our children should go to? How many of you are willing to risk the kind of things you think you should change? Most parents today think they had a good education. So when they think about school, they think about the kind of education they had. How do we change that thinking? So will education be as usual? More regional collaboration. I think the European Union has done a much better job than some of the other parts of the world in collaborating together. It has Erasmus projects. It has other EU commissions on education. So more regional collaboration will occur. Global giants. Are there global giants? Should there be a unicorn in education? Should a company like Bijou out of India be a global giant? Should it be a unicorn? Is that good for education? Is that something we want? And how do we make sure that we are making products that are culturally effective around the world? Peer-to-peer learning. There is more peer-to-peer learning going on today, and COVID sort of expedited that, than there ever has been before. And we find that children are very happy, adults are very happy to do peer-to-peer learning. Who do you ask first when you have a question? Your friend, somebody on TikTok, somebody on YouTube. So peer-to-peer learning is going to grow, and we're going to see that change the way we offer courses. And of course, the AI robo-revolution is going to change education. The other thing that the other thing that Holon has produced is this global learning landscape. They update this regularly. It's available on their website. Many of the investors in the United States use this to figure out when a company comes to them and says, I'm going to save the world in skills and jobs. They look at this chemistry, chart that gives you all these symbols for EdTech learning. Please take a look at this when you get a chance. I think it will help you figure out where you sit. And in addition, they have an ability for you to use their database and search for companies, search for people that are doing things that you're doing. And when I look at new companies, one of the things I want is passion. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, then get out of the business. But the other thing I look for is, have you done your homework on the competitive analysis of what else is out there? I can't tell you how many times a young entrepreneur, or an old one, walks into my office and says, I have just created the best application to do X. And I look at them and I say, well, you might have, but have you looked at blah, blah, blah? And they look at me like I'm speaking Greek. They have not done their homework. And as soon as I realize that, I don't object to the fact that you think you've created something better than what's out there, but you better know what's out there before you tell me that. So I'm going to tell you a story for contemplation. I started, of course, with the most innovative disruption today. I asked ChatGPT and they answered. What is the difference between innovation? What is the synergy between innovation and EdTech entrepreneurship? And this is what they answered. Innovation and EdTech entrepreneurship are closely related, but they are not the same thing. Innovation refers to the creation or introduction of new ideas, products, processes, or services that are perceived as useful, valuable, or novel. On the other hand, entrepreneurship refers to the process of identifying, developing, and bringing to market new business opportunities. Where is the fine line between doing well, innovating, and doing good? So I decided that I then asked ChatGPT, I said, this isn't very humorous or engaging, so give me another answer to my question. So while they gave me a solid answer, and it is the definition I used previously when my students, I asked again and I said, please make the answer more humorous and engaging. And this is what I got. Think of innovation and entrepreneurship as two peas in a pod. While they are closely related, they have distinct differences and sets them apart. Innovation is the creative spark that ignites a fire, while the entrepreneurship is the fuel that keeps it burning. This was better. It still wasn't what I was looking for, so I asked them for a joke on innovation. And while some of the answers were somewhat funny, none were innovative, and besides, I don't tell jokes very well. So, last thing I want to talk about is what happened recently in the news. I did read an article that talks about innovation, and I questioned the article recently whether innovation is at its worst or best in EdTech. One of the very large, not a unicorn, but very successful companies in the US, the newspaper reported that the revenues of a large business, the New York Times, by the way, whose stock had dropped 46% on Tuesday. ChatGPT had predicted recently that the business would lose almost $1 billion in revenue this year. It was a business that was considered innovative and entrepreneurial. Was this a good thing or a bad thing? And by the way, ChatGPT's answer, and the CEO, of course, responded, and ChatGPT's answer was not wrong, but it was not positioned with all the data that the CEO had to present. Clearly, the stock has improved, but this is something we have to really worry about. So are we going to be able to disrupt an innovation with EdTech, an industry? Clearly, Uber disrupted transportation, Airbnb the hotel business, Tesla the auto business, Amazon the retail business, Netflix the entertainment, Apple the phone, 3D printing, manufacturing, blockchain, financial, and virtual reality gaming. And the AA technology industry, EdTech and education, do we have the solution that will disrupt education? I don't think we're there yet, but we need to create an ecosystem around that. The ecosystem needs to consist of researchers, investors from and government and foundations, entrepreneurs, and the teachers, students, practitioners, people in the learning space. And if we don't bring all those people together, we will not create an innovation ecosystem that will disrupt education and use the wonderful products that you are inventing in EdTech. Today, EdTech is a collection of lots of people with lots of solutions. They're small solutions, most of what I look at. But I want to know what that solution is solving. I want to solve the big problems. And I think all of you in this room today want to solve the big problems, but you can't do it alone. And when a new company comes to me and I ask them, well, who's on your team? And they tell me, well, I'm a techie person or I'm a business person. And I say, well, where's the teacher or the educator or the chief learning officer? Where's that person on your team? When do you speak to entrepreneurs if you're an investor? When do you look at the researcher of people in corporations? So unless you bring together all of these people in an innovation ecosystem, you will not succeed. So innovation and entrepreneurship are synonymous, but they are not synonymous, but they are synergistic. And creativity is so crucial for entrepreneurs today. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.